This is part 2 of starting an automobile company from scratch. In the last video, I talked about my plan and my vision for the startup. I also mentioned that I'm starting with electric bicycles. So today, I'm doing something much more practical, factory setup. So right now, I don't have a proper workshop yet, and renting a workshop space is out of my budget. So I'm just starting with whatever space I already have, which basically means I'm turning a part of my house into a small factory to manufacture these electric bicycles. By the end of this video, I'll have a proper working fabrication space inside my house so that I can start the production. So when I started planning this startup, I did what most people normally do. I contacted a few factories in China to see if they could manufacture the bikes for me. But almost all of them had very large MOQs, and the price of each unit was also pretty high. Some factories wanted orders of hundreds, sometimes even thousands of bikes. So for a startup, that doesn't really make sense. So I started running the numbers and realized that for a hardware product like this one, it's actually cheaper to manufacture in India. So I decided to manufacture myself. Now it's definitely harder than outsourcing, but it also gives me a lot more flexibility and room for innovation. And instead of waiting for investors or big funding rounds, I decided to start with whatever I already have. So the first step was shopping. I had to buy the tools, the machines, and raw materials which is required to set up this factory. And since I'm doing everything alone, I had to figure everything out myself. At this stage, the goal is not to build a perfect factory. The goal is to build a bare minimum setup which is required to start the production. So for cutting the long steel pipes into pieces, I bought an abrasive cut-off saw. After that, I got a welding machine to join the pieces together and build the cycle frames. Originally, I wanted to buy a MIG welder because it produces cleaner welds, but the machine along with the gas setup was pretty expensive for where I'm starting. So I went with a basic arc welder instead. Then I also bought angle grinders for finishing along with a bunch of basic hand tools. Buying the tools was actually the easy part. Most of them were available online. In total, I spent roughly 1 lakh rupees on the tools and equipment. After getting the tools, the next step was sourcing the actual bicycle components. Things like handlebars, tires, rim, crankset, pedals, brake, batteries, and motors. Now, for prototyping, I could have just bought everything from retail websites like Amazon. But sooner or later, I'll need proper suppliers anyways. So I decided to start looking for distributors directly. At first, I started searching on Alibaba, but the shipping cost and MOQ were way too high for a small startup. Even some Indian suppliers had surprisingly large MOQs. In a few cases, they were asking for orders big enough to fill an entire shipping container, which obviously doesn't make sense when you are just trying to build the first prototype. Many suppliers were not even interested in very small quantities. Some of them never even replied at all. So, for the next few months, I was basically just contacting different suppliers and distributors, explaining that this is a startup and right now I only need a few samples to build the first prototype. So, after a lot of messages and calls, I finally found a few vendors who were willing to sell smaller quantities. I basically had to convince them that this is a startup and I'll place larger orders in the future. And that was enough to get started. Now I wanted to buy the frame material. Originally, I wanted to build the bicycles using aluminium because aluminium is lighter and generally feels a bit more premium. But that plan didn't work out. Aluminium requires TIG or MIG welding, and those machines, along with the gas setups, were outside my budget. I also had a hard time finding aluminium tubes in the exact sizes that I need. So, after looking into it for a while, I decided to go with steel. Steel is heavier than aluminium, but for the initial phase, that's completely fine. While searching for steel suppliers, I found out that Tata Steel actually sells steel online. There was a minimum order quantity of 15,000 rupees, which ended up being roughly 200 kilograms of steel. So I placed the order. And once everything finally arrived, the machines, components, and all the raw material, I had spent roughly 4 lakh rupees in total. And at that point, I finally had everything I needed to start setting up the factory. So, this is my house. I live on the first floor, and the ground floor is what I'm going to be converting into a factory. The ground floor was previously rented out, but the condition right now is not great. The paint is chipped, damaged walls, and fixing all of it would cost quite a bit. And realistically, the rent would never recover that cost. So instead of repairing it, I decided to turn it into a workplace. First, I started by cleaning the space, just getting rid of everything and clearing it out. And this is what the living room looks like after cleaning. Then I started bringing in the 6-meter steel pipes. These will be used to make the bicycle frames. In total, it's around 200 kilos of steel, and I had to move all of it myself. So this took a while. This is also the area where I'll be cutting the pipes and prepare the frame parts. I'm also planning to use the living room as the storage area for the cycle components, and eventually the final assembly area for the electric bicycles. Then I placed the cutoff saw which will be used for cutting these pipes. Once the steel pipes were in place, I started organizing the bicycle parts and other raw materials properly. These boxes are filled with handlebars, pedals, bottom brackets, chains, and other components. I went through the boxes and arranged everything so it's easier to access later. And once that was done, I cleared out the larger boxes to free up space for working and assembly. I also spent some time going through the frames, just checking them, getting a feel for how they sit, and how everything is coming together so far. This is what the living room finally looks like. This whole process took about 3 days. Now it's time to work on the kitchen. This is what it currently looks like. I'm planning to use the kitchen as the welding and grinding area. It already has a solid counter which should work well for fabrication, so I won't need to get additional tables. So first I started by cleaning everything. The space was in pretty rough shape, so it took some time to clear it out, remove the dirt, and get it to a usable condition. It was mostly just basic cleaning, but it still took a fair bit of effort. Once that was done, I started setting up the tools on the counter. First, I placed the welding machine where it's easy to access. Then I added the clamps and other basic tools around it. And finally, I set up the angle grinders so everything is within reach while working. And after setting everything up, this is what the kitchen looks like now. This used to be the first bedroom, and now I'm using it as a paint room. And the next room is where I'll be handling the electronics. Things like battery pack, BMS, and other components will be assembled here. This space will also double as my office. So this is where I'll be working on my laptop and handling the design and planning side of things. So at this point, I finally have everything that I need to start manufacturing. All the tools, machinery, and the basic components. It's definitely a bare minimum setup, nothing fancy, but that's enough to get started. In the next video, I'm going to start with product design and design my first e-bike. This is where real engineering starts. If you want to follow this journey, subscribe and follow along. Thanks for watching.